The walls on both sides of the building collapsed inward. The roof of the building collapsed downward. So most of the weight of the building landed centrally into the building.
6 people have died at an Amazon warehouse in Edwardsville, Illinois, after it was hit by a tornado and collapsed. Now, as often as I criticize Amazon's mistreatment of workers, I initially thought this was just a freak accident. I mean, how could you possibly blame Amazon for a random tornado hitting a facility? But the more I looked into it, the more I understood why a lot of people are pinning this on Amazon. So before I get to that part of it, first let's start with what actually happened here. From local KMOV reporting, the walls on both sides of the building collapsed inward, causing the roof to fall. The 11-inch thick, 40-foot tall walls could not sustain the tornado that hit the building Friday night. The National Weather Service confirmed that it was a Category EF3 tornado that went through Edwardsville Friday night. Winds picked up to as much as 150 miles per hour. Amazon workers identified as dead by the local coroner were DeAndre S. Morrow, 28, of St. Louis, Missouri, Kevin D. Dickey, 62, of Carlisle, Illinois, Clayton Lynn Cope, 29, of Alton, Illinois, Etheria S. Hebb, 24, of St. Louis, Missouri, and Larry E. Verdin, 46, of Collinsville, Illinois. Amazon cargo driver Austin J. McEwen, 26, died trying to shelter from a powerful tornado in the bathroom at the warehouse, according to a coworker. Several employees told Reuters that they had been directed to shelter in bathrooms by Amazon managers after receiving emergency alerts on mobile phones from local authorities. The first warning was issued about 40 minutes before the tornado hit, according to firefighters and the Illinois governor. Okay, so let's look at some of these details here. So the first warning was issued 40 minutes before the tornado hit. Now, if you're in the shoes of these Amazon managers, what do you tell your employees to do? Leave? Potentially sending them into a tornado? Or do you tell them to shelter in place because we assume Illinois, being one of the top states here hit by tornadoes at number 9, that Amazon would have a proper facility, a proper room that is meant for this kind of scenario? As a Amazon manager, I would assume you would tell them to shelter in place because you don't want to send them home, potentially sending them into the deadly weather or a tornado. So that part makes sense. I mean, the story's coming out, like this one in New York Post, Amazon worker who died in warehouse collapse wasn't allowed to leave, girlfriend says. But you can understand why, right? Like, think of it as, you know, someone is drunk at your party and they want to leave and drive home. You knowing they are drunk and about to drive, it is now on you if you let them leave and drive home. So I can understand being in the position of these managers there, that, yeah, you don't want these employees to leave because you don't want them to get killed on the way home. Because you're assuming that the facility you have is going to be able to protect them. But of course, that's where they were wrong. So the fact that you have tornadoes that are this common, again, ranked number 9 out of all states in terms of how frequent these tornadoes are, and you don't have a proper place to shelter people, I mean, this is, I would think, the main criticism here at Amazon. Do not actually have a proper system in place to deal with a situation like this. Clearly, they are at fault here. Now, also, there's a history of Amazon forcing workers to work through these sorts of extreme events. So Brian Kahn here tweeting out, "This is the 3rd time in 6 months Amazon workers have been working in the path of deadly weather. Warehouse workers also had to go in during record-smashing heat in the Pacific Northwest and the deadly Ida floods in New York City. Just like those disasters, last night's tornadoes were well forecast." So, yes, they were forecasted, but it was a 40-minute warning. It's not a lot of time, especially if you live further away from the warehouse. You know, it's not the same as making people work through a heat wave or making somebody come in during flooding. I think it's different than that. A tornado is a little more, you know, out of nowhere compared to ongoing floods or a heat wave. But with that said, the Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union criticized Amazon for requiring employees to work through a tornado warning. Quote, "This is another outrageous example of the company putting profits over the health and safety of their workers, and we cannot stand for this. Amazon cannot continue to be let off the hook for putting hard-working people's lives at risk. Our union will not back down until Amazon is held accountable for these and so many more dangerous labor practices, said Stuart Applebaum, president of the RWDSU. So, look, I understand their outrage here based on Amazon's history and their approach to their workers. Of course, I mean, as I've covered countless times, Amazon's mistreatment of workers is well documented. But this is a situation where there's blame in two specific places. The lack of an actual place to shelter in a warehouse like this with these giant concrete walls. And I mean, clearly the structure was not meant to be hit by a tornado. It collapsed in on itself. That in addition to this part of it. So this from New York Times here. The tragedy raises concerns about the e-commerce giant's use of contractors. The biggest is how Amazon prepares facilities and workers whose ranks swell during the holiday season for emergencies. Of the 190 people who worked at the Edwardsville Delivery Center, only 7 were full-time Amazon employees, a local official told the Times' Karen Weiss and Eric Berger. Industry consultants say the use of contractors lets the company avoid liability for accidents and other risks. In Edwardsville, local officials said the fact that so many of the workers at the facility were temporary made it difficult to account for all those who could be missing in the wake of the tornado, complicating initial rescue efforts. So not only does Amazon's heavy reliance on contractors here allow them to avoid liability for accidents and other risks, but also it complicated the rescue efforts because the first responders didn't know who was actually working, how many employees there were that they had to potentially rescue. So that made the whole process a lot more complicated. So blame here clearly in these two very specific areas. Their use of contractors and that the complication of rescue efforts because of that, and also the lack of a real place to shelter in place. But I mean, the criticisms of making these workers work through a tornado it's not the same as like a hurricane or, you know, a flood or some kind of ongoing weather event. Tornadoes come and go. I mean, this tornado apparently, according to some reports, was actually formed within the parking lot at the Amazon facility and then dissipated after it hit the warehouse. So you can't really account for an event like that. It's out of nowhere. When that kind of weather system is approaching, you only have a short amount of time, a short window to actually, you know, account for what to do. So to send people home in the middle of that, I think is also dangerous. So the only real blame here is clearly the facility was not meant to be hit by a tornado, despite the fact that it's in a place that is frequented by tornadoes. And also, of course, the reliance on contractors, as I just discussed. But it's, you know, another example of how Amazon, for them, how they treat employees, the well-being of their employees is, you know, at best secondary to anything else. And of course, well below the importance and the focus on their profits.